But I would go over on Jesse Bates.
Yeah.
I like Atlanta this season. They spent a bunch of money in free agency on the defensive side of the ball. He just has to stay healthy, obviously. And, look at the quarterback play in that division. You have some young quarterbacks, obviously, and then you have Derek Carr, who loves throwing picks. There's a good chance he throws 14 or 15 of them this season once again. So I would go over on him. And then I know he's older. I would even maybe look at the over on the Honey Badger. The Saints play the easiest schedule this season. They're going to see Desmond Ridder twice. They're going to see Bryce, who I know we love, but he's a rookie. So I'd probably look at both of those safeties and go over. But, yeah, I do like the look on Jesse Bates. I think he's going to have another big year, and I like Atlanta this season a lot.
This is going to drag on for a while. I really do believe that Jonathan Taylor is going to dig his heels in, looking at a team that's not going to go very far this year if you're the Colts, and say, you know what? You don't want to pay me? The owner's going to come out and say what he did? Fine, I'll dig my heels in, and I won't show up. And the Colts could be an absolute disaster this season. The Colts and Raiders might end up having the two worst records in the NFL.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious how – go ahead, Ryan.
No, go on. No, you got it. Go on.
I was just going to say, yes, that's true, and – what is the scenario where they're not? Because you said they could be a disaster. I don't know if there's a scenario that exists that they're not a disaster.
I think the only way that they're not is if Jonathan Taylor's there for the entire season and he runs like he did 2 years ago, where he ran for 1,800 yards and was in the MVP conversation. Now, they could still win 5 games, right? It doesn't mean that they're going to be a good team, but that's the best running back in the NFL 2 years ago. If you're bringing that back again, that keeps them away from total and complete disaster, takes a lot of pressure off Anthony Richardson, and just gives them an opportunity to at least be, even just say, semi-competitive. But if he's not there, and this is going to be something that is a distraction and players keep getting asked about it, which seems like the more likely scenario, this is... Maybe they win 3 games. Maybe they only win a couple. I mean, Anthony Richardson could look like a ton of fun out there on the field, but they ain't going to win much.
Yeah, and I know how good Jonathan Taylor was a couple of years ago, and I know last year he was beat up, right? The offensive line wasn't as good. Wasn't very good at all, actually, for Indianapolis. But also, after initial contact even, he didn't do a whole lot. He just didn't really look like Jonathan Taylor, and I always worried when he was at Wisconsin just because of all the carries. They were pretty much running him into the ground there. And the problem for him, I don't know what the market will be. What's the market for a running back? Even a running back that's not even 27 years old that just led the league in rushing 2 years ago. I don't know what they get in return, so I don't know what ends up happening. The only thing I'd say about the Colts, the way that they don't end up being a disaster, is if Shane Steichen could put in an offensive system kind of like he did in Philadelphia for Jalen, for Anthony Richardson.
The scoreboard's the scoreboard, and Georgia's won the last 2 national championships, and they almost did the last one, making a mockery of the sport. I think it was, 65-10? I can't remember what the final score was.
Lost track very quickly in that.
Alabama did something like that in 2012 in a much smaller scale, what they did to Notre Dame down in Miami. But what Georgia did last year was just a reminder that they're at the top of the mountain, and they're not planning on going anywhere. Now, Stetson Bennett was terrific. He won 2 national championships, but you can make the argument whoever comes in next might be a better fundamental quarterback than Stetson Bennett. And when we talk about Georgia, especially on both the offensive and defensive line, I mean, Alabama likes to use the saying they don't rebuild, they reload. What Georgia does in the trenches is just ridiculous, the way that they're able to recruit these kids from not just their state, from not just Panhandle, Florida, but they're going into South Carolina now. They're recruiting parts of Texas the same way Nick Saban and his staff have done over the last 10, 15 years. So Kirby Smart has quite literally built Tuscaloosa in Athens. The way that he's running his program is incredibly reminiscent of what he learned at Alabama during his time as the defensive coordinator. And I don't think Georgia's going anywhere. And last year I made the mistake of picking Tennessee to win the East. Every time they throw the graphic up, there'd be 4 names next to it in the parentheses. And I'd always tell my buddies back home, hey, I'm one of those 4. And then they played in Athens, and Tennessee got their ass kicked. And I said, I guess I was completely wrong. So I learned this year. I picked Georgia to win the East, and I picked Alabama to win the West. But I will say, if you're looking for some value, I mean, LSU wasn't even that great on paper last year. Brian Kelly didn't even get his classes in, and they took Alabama to overtime and then beat them. Now, the knock on LSU for all these years is they had the caliber of athlete of Alabama, but they couldn't get the most out of them. And you know what? Everyone liked making fun of Brian Kelly last year. Oh, the word was fit, right? He's not a fit. He's not going to fit here. And all he did was win the SEC West, beat Alabama, and made himself a lot of money in the process because he's going to be in that LSU job for a very long time. So I think the disrespect if we want to talk about disrespect this offseason, that's Brian Kelly, who gets to shake his rear end in all our faces, because I think what LSU did last year was unbelievable considering the caliber of talent they had on that roster. Well, guys, that's the $10 million question, and if I knew the answer to it, I'd be a popular man down here in Birmingham, but I almost feel like my answer changes by the week. Going into fall camp, I thought Jalen Milroe was going to have every opportunity to win the job. And then you get in camp, and from the whispers that we hear, because we don't get to watch camp, we get state-run media sending us highlights at the end of the day, which is all supervised by coaches and PR staff and all sorts of SIDs. But from what I've heard from people I've talked to is that Ty Simpson probably has the inside track at the moment to be the overall starter for the year. Now, what do I mean by for the entire year? I don't believe who starts game one against Middle Tennessee State in 25 days necessarily will be the starter week 2 when Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns come to town. So it's going to be one of the three. It's going to be Jalen Milroe, who was Bryce Young's backup for the last 2 seasons and started the A&M game last year, came in relief in the Arkansas game up in Fayetteville. And then the other quarterback is Ty Simpson, the 5-star prospect out of Tennessee, who kind of has all the makeup, has all the measurables. And then the wild card who was thrown in after spring practice was Tyler Buckner, coming from Notre Dame, who Tommy Rees, the new Alabama offensive coordinator coming from Notre Dame, has experience with, played really well in the Gator Bowl last year against South Carolina. So he's kind of the wild card, the wrench thrown into the plans, and he's not getting as many reps as I've been told as both Milroe and Simpson. So I think it's going to be one of those first 2 guys, and if you made me pick right now, I'll say Ty Simpson just because I think the ceiling is a little higher.
I go with the recency bias with these player awards because we all fall into it. Blake Snell's been the best pitcher in baseball since the calendar turned to probably May. So you're looking at, let's say, Snell, rides this thing into the end of the year. Padres sneak into the playoffs. So you're looking at a Cy Young candidate, a guy, by the way, that was completely overlooked and left off the All-Star ballot, which was a crime against humanity. And so maybe they're looking to, pay him back, if you will, with a little Cy Young. So I like the recency bias guys with player awards. It's a narrative award, and right now with nobody really running away with this thing, Zach Gallen is one of the front runners too, but the Diamondbacks haven't been playing well of late. Logan Webb's been pitching well of late, but right now, if I were to put my money on anybody, it'd probably be Blake Snell just because of how streaky he is of a pitcher.